Hi there, it's Llarold, and this is my in-depth Vengeance Demon Hunter guide for Season 4 of Shadowlands. As usual, I'm going to cover all the stuff I do in a class guide, talk about Covenants, Legendaries, and everything you need to know to succeed while playing a Vengeance Demon Hunter. I'm also going to highlight some of the important Season 4 specific gear that hasn't been available throughout the rest of the expansion, and kind of put a spotlight on some of the things that are new and shiny. Because this is supposed to be a pretty big comprehensive reference document, I've put in chapters so you can skip around as needed. And finally, this is YouTube, so like and subscribe, please, I beg of you. Well, that's enough introduction. So now let's do the what's changed section. Oh, wow, this part sure has been fun. Now let's move to the what's good section. I did this with Monk, but hey, the whole Demon Hunter class is what's good. See, it is different from the Monk one because I don't really like playing Windwalker, and I never play Mistweaver, even though, yeah, sure, Windwalker's really good in Mythic Plus right now. I just don't think it's fun right now. But I love Havoc. It's the most fun DPS spec in the game. Vengeance is super fun too. I think it's my favorite tank in Mythic Plus. Vengeance Demon Hunter feels like the most modern tank in WoW. It doesn't have a clear, unified defensive identity like all of the others do. Just to give some examples, Monk has Stagger and Purify and Celestial Brew. Blood DK has Death Strike, Self-Healing, and a ton of cooldowns. Warrior has Shield Block and consistently high damage mitigation. That sort of thing. But Demon Hunter pretty much has a combination of everything. Despite how much Demon Hunter theory crafters like to complain about it, the defensive cooldown toolkit for Vengeance is actually very good right now. You have high uptime on defensive cooldowns while tanking to the point that you can basically always have something rolling. I think one of the things that people like to cherry pick about Demon Hunter is that the cooldowns are not nearly as generically applicable as other tank cooldowns, and that is true. You press shield wall, that's 50% damage reduction, or 40%, whatever. It just works on everything. But in the greater context of the Demon Hunter class, I don't think that the weirdness of all the different cooldowns is a problem. For example, Metamorphosis, the main shield wall for Demon Hunter, doesn't actually give any direct damage reduction. It's just 50% more health and a huge boost of armor, but 50% more health is a ton of health on Demon Hunter, since the class already has a huge base health pool to begin with. And the class by far has the highest damage reduction against spell damage. Just comparing that with Prot Warrior, Spell Reflection is a 20-second cooldown that sometimes can reflect important spells or debuffs, but usually it can't. In that case, it's 20% damage reduction against spell damage for 5 seconds. Again, 20-second cooldown. Best case scenario, 25% uptime on 20% reduction. Demon Hunter, with Conduits, 31% spell damage reduction. Totally passive, 100% uptime. You don't have to do anything. You could disconnect and still take less spell damage than any other tank. And this is true of most of the Demon Hunter toolkit as well. The self-healing, yeah, it's not good when you compare it to a Blood DK. In Season 3, I did over 30,000 HPS on Rygalon as Blood. If I did half that on Demon Hunter, I would be the #1 tank healing parse, but still, by like 10%. Does that difference in HPS meters matter between classes? Not really. Honestly, Demon Hunter self-healing is kind of mediocre in raids, but it's consistently very good in Mythic Plus, and it's yet another part of the large, diverse toolkit that the class has. Also, much like Monk, Demon Hunter is extremely mobile. I kind of go back and forth as to which class has better mobility. Both are very good, though. I think Demon Hunter is better in Castle Nathria, and I preferred it in Sanctum of Domination as well. Doing Painsmith on a Monk was really hard. You have the toolkit to be able to do everything you need to on that fight, rolling out with weapons, transcending through sets of balls, but on a Demon Hunter, you can kind of just leap out, jump and glide around the balls every time. No cooldowns that you're having to manage, no tricky little dodging in, 1 yard squares for periods of time while you wait for Transcend to come back. You just jump around the balls and glide around. That's it. Easy as pie. When we think about how good a class is, there are levels to consider. For the majority of people just doing weekly 15s, any class can totally be 100% fine. But generally speaking, playing the standard in-meta classes at the high end and emulating the way that high-end players play the game tends to make it less difficult than just trying to figure things out completely on your own. Up in the 20 to 25 range, basically all the tanks that weren't Protection Warrior were reasonably popular throughout Season 3 of Shadowlands. Demon Hunter spent most of Season 3 around 3rd, right behind DK and Monk. Now I know that things get a little different once you're really trying to optimize and play only the best specs to push the absolute highest level keys. But for me, that's not really relevant. In my experience doing keys in the upper teens and low 20s, I found Demon Hunter to be by far the easiest class to play. I think it has a really nice varied toolkit that can handle everything. You have an AoE silence, multiple crowd controls, tons of AoE damage, good self-healing, and quality defensive cooldowns. I think Demon Hunter is by far the easiest tank to hold threat on throughout a dungeon as well. There's never a pull ever where I go in worried that I might lose threat because I don't have Incarnation or Dancing Rune Weapon available. I don't need a Covenant ability off cooldown to do good burst AoE threat on the pull, although it helps. I don't need to chain pull like a gorilla to maintain Conqueror's Banner like I do on Warrior. I always have the ability to generate good AoE threat just by hitting Infernal Strike to leap in, Immolation Aura, and Spirit Bomb. Also, the magic damage debuff that Demon Hunter provides is something that groups really appreciate. Although, to be honest, I wish that whole debuff and buff matrix was just gone from the game, and people could just play classes based on what they like most and what's best, more than some design that a designer feels attached to. So now that we've gotten a few days into Season 4, and I've gotten the chance to get into some dungeons and play Demon Hunter a bit, and into Raid and play Demon Hunter there a bit as well, I came in very excited. I really had high hopes for the class in this final season of Shadowlands, and it has totally exceeded them all. It's still every bit as fun as it has been. It was better in Castle Nathria, even than I remembered, and I remembered it being the best. And yeah, it's just really things are looking up for Demon Hunter right now. So now let's move on to the Vengeance Demon Hunter tier set bonuses. The 2-piece bonus grants a 10% chance for Immolation Aura damage to generate a Soul Fragment. This scales linearly with your target count. It adds basically 1 fragment every 10 seconds per nearby target. This basically fits in with every other aspect of Demon Hunter's design. It's not great in single target, but it's not terrible. But in AoE, it's insanely good. The 4-piece bonus grants you cooldown reduction on Immolation Aura or Fell Devastation every time you consume a Soul Fragment. Just like the 2-piece, this is a little underwhelming in single target. Not bad, but not nearly as big of a boost in power as it is in AoE. The increase in Immolation Aura uptime is good. You basically always have 100% uptime in single target, and then in AoE, you have some nice talent synergy that helps you generate tons more Soul Fragments. In terms of the Fell Devastation cooldown reduction, that's the real selling point. It just gives you a substantial defensive cooldown uptime increase, especially in AoE, Mythic Plus, where you're going to need it the most. This has been such a great pair of bonuses since it was introduced in patch 9.2. It's great in Mythic Plus, I love it, probably one of the more fun tier set bonuses to play with on tanks. In raids, again, not quite as good because fights tend to be more single target-ish. But even in the worst case scenarios, it's still very good for your defensive value and a pretty decent little offensive boost as well. Let me finish by saying you should want to equip tier in the helm, shoulders, chest, and pants slots. Gloves have a lot of mastery, which is not a great stat. So that's a slot where you ideally want to wear some sort of non-tier piece that has versatility and haste on it. Let's move on to Covenants, and this is going to be pretty quick. Kyrian is the #1 choice for Vengeance Demon Hunter in every situation. Elysian Decree rocks. The Kyrian Covenant Legendary is also very nice. Everything about Kyrian is perfect for Vengeance Demon Hunters. There's synergy with your talents, there's synergy with Mechanicos, it's just great. I can't think of a single reason to ever play Vengeance as anything other than Kyrian. Venthyr is really good as Havoc, but the legendary synergies that work as Havoc to make it super strong do not function as Vengeance, so there's absolutely nothing there. I thought there might be going into patch 9.2's PTR, but that didn't wind up being the case at all. You just play Kyrian the whole time, you're done. And now let's move on to Soulbinds. Mechanicos is your best Soulbind by far. The only change I would make is that on purely single target raid fights, I would consider swapping out Hammer of Genesis for Soul Steel Clamps and an extra potency conduit. I personally don't do this because I am lazy and just forget to do it, and I haven't progged as a Demon Hunter at any point in Shadowlands. If I were progging on a boss and sitting there doing a boss for 30 or 50 pulls, which, hey, maybe next week on Paintsmith, I think I would consider doing that, but depending on how much damage it deals, I may prefer to just have the extra endurance conduit for more defense instead of slightly more soul cleave damage. I guess we'll see. So now let's go over conduits, and we'll start with potency conduits. Growing Inferno is the best potency conduit available to Vengeance Demon Hunters, and that was true even before the tier set bonuses were a thing in the game at all. The extra Immolation Aura uptime granted by the 4-piece bonus only makes this conduit stronger. The Kyrian potency conduit is Repeat Decree. It's also very good. If you wind up using a third potency conduit, you have two options. Adaptive Armor Fragment gives you a little bit of defensive value, it's not really all that great. I would prefer to use Soul Furnace, which will add more damage than Adaptive Armor Fragment. It's also not really great, but this is mostly just for adding single target damage value, and for that, Soul Furnace is better. If you're really more worried about defensive value in that pure single target situation, I would just run the extra Endurance Conduit over Adaptive Armor Fragment in the first place. Then you don't have to swap anything out. Vengeance has really good Endurance Conduits too. Feldevender and Viscous Ink are by far the best Endurance Conduits available to Vengeance Demon Hunters, and you should use both of them all the time. Feldefender grants a lot of cooldown reduction on Fel Devastation. It's great. It's one of your main defensive cooldowns. Viscous Ink grants an enormous amount of passive spell damage reduction. It's maybe the best Endurance Conduit in the entire game. As for your third Endurance Conduit, Shattered Restoration and Condensed Animosphere are both good options. They're fairly close in value most of the time, but Shattered Restoration has a greater tendency to be better in dangerous situations, especially in Mythic Plus. Condensed Animosphere is a little more consistent. It's arguably better in raids where damage intake can be lower and more controlled. Shattered Restoration is absolutely better in Mythic Plus, and it can really add up to a lot of extra healing when you make big pulls and take lots of damage. Personally, I just run Shattered Restoration all the time and just don't really worry that much about swapping it out for raids. Finally, let's briefly cover Finesse Conduit. Felfire Haste adds a little more mobility onto Infernal Strike. It's not great, but you have to take one Finesse Conduit in the Mechanicos tree, and this is the only conduit in the Finesse slot that is remotely useful any of the time. Next up is Legendaries. First and most important is Dark Glare Boon. It is the best legendary for Mythic Plus, and the best one for Vengeance Demon Hunters overall. If you only craft one legendary, other than Unity, this should be it. You'll want to craft it on the neck slot unless you have a really good non-legendary neck. In that case, the belt slot is a decent option as well. This legendary gives you a 40% chance to not trigger the cooldown or cost of Fel Devastation. Using an RNG legendary seems kinda bad, but because of the synergy that this has with the tier set 4-piece, all the cooldown reduction that you get on Fel Devastation and Mythic Plus makes it a pretty short cooldown, defensive cooldown. And the amount of procs that you can get out of this during a Mythic Plus run is really high. You can also get back-to-back procs at times. I mean, I've had 5 or 6 Fell Devastations in a row at points of time and basically had the equivalent of a shield wall just running for 40 seconds. Even without the tier set, this was a good legendary power because each proc represents such a humongous boost of defensive value. I think there's a conception when tanking on basically any other class that having randomness when it comes to your defensive cooldowns is like bad and very annoying, and that's generally true. But because Demon Hunter has so many other defensive components to layer in and manage in between, dry spells of not getting procs, on top of all of the excellent cooldown reduction that you can get out of the tier set bonus, this legendary adds so much defensive value and the ability to move other stuff around to compensate for when you get big sets of procs in a row. Now let me go over Blind Faith, the Kyrian legendary, which you get by wearing Unity. Basically, when you use Elysian Decree, you immediately get a buff that grants you 1% versatility for each soul fragment you consume, capping at 20. It also gives you 10 Fury for each soul fragment you pick up. This was bugged initially in patch 9.2 and stopped giving Fury once you hit 20 stacks, but that was fixed, thankfully. This legendary has some really good synergies with the rest of your toolkit, and it also creates a nice combo when using Elysian Decree. You always want to build up 5 soul fragments before you cast Elysian Decree, then you cast it, and then before it actually goes off, you immediately consume them with Spirit Bomb or Soul Cleave. This way, you start with 5 stacks of the versatility buff before basically anything has happened. Less than 1 second has passed from you casting it and getting the buff, and you're already at 5 stacks. If you're using Spirit Bomb, you can cast it a second time to be at 10 stacks of the buff in only 2 GCDs. In terms of which slot to run Unity, you can use it anywhere. Boots are a decent option. Belt is a really good option, although it does have a little bit of conflict with Dark Glare Boon. Bracers are a good option, but they have conflict with the other 2 legendaries I'm about to mention. So, I like boots, belt, wherever. Basically any slot where you don't have a great haste verse item or tier gear is a prime candidate for Unity. The other primary non-Unity legendary for Vengeance Demon Hunters is Razalix's Defilement. It's really only useful in raids. It's a good offensive and defensive option that synergizes nicely with Elysian Decree and Blind Faith, but doesn't work with Spirit Bomb at all, so it is not a viable candidate for use in Mythic Plus. If you run Razalix and Blind Faith together, you can average about 20-second cooldowns on Elysian Decree, sometimes even a little shorter, allowing you to maintain permanent uptime on the excellent versatility buff and Fury generation that Blind Faith offers. This rocks. I wish that it did more single target damage, but it is still a very fun playstyle to me. If they buff the damage by legitimately 50% based on the last time I looked at logs, which was a couple of days ago, I think Demon Hunter would be considered a top tier raid tank. It's pretty solid in the 2 non-sepulcher raids, and this is, a very fun playstyle. It feels tanky. I just wish it did a little more damage. This is a legendary you're going to want to craft on bracers. And just to be thorough, Fiery Soul still has some value as a heavy defense option in raids. It's generally not as good as Razalix's Defilement, but for bosses that burst extremely hard, where you want to have really high uptime on Fiery Brand, so the Jailer, Sylvanas, Sire Denathrius, maybe Painsmith and Guardian of the First Ones, maybe Sludgefist, I think for all those situations, this can be a really good option. I probably still wouldn't default to running Fiery Soul. I would try to use Razalix's Defilement for that wonderful synergy with Blind Faith. The only situation where I would swap to Fiery Soul is if I found that I just couldn't live without the extra uptime on Fiery Brand to survive big boss combos, again, like Jailer combos, like Sire Denathrius's Shattering Pain, or whatever it's called. If you do find yourself struggling to stay alive on mostly single target raid fights, I would say this is the first thing to swap out for sure. This legendary really helps reduce the cooldown of Fiery Brand, so you can basically always have a major defensive cooldown rolling at any time when you're tanking. I think that the 20 stacks of extra versatility from Razzelik's Defilement's very nice and adds more overall value, but it's definitely not as good as having doubled the uptime on a 40% damage reduction effect, at least in terms of tankiness. Also, having more uptime on Fiery Brand lets you double up on things in fights that have a lot of burst damage, like, again, Guardian of the first ones, having Fiery Brand up for every set of combos, but then also being able to have, like, meta or some other cooldown rolling with that as well. Pretty cool. And finally, this is a legendary you are also going to want to wear on your bracers. So, just to recap, Dark Glare Boon, pretty much the best overall legendary, definitely the best for Mythic Plus, but you can use it in raids and it works pretty well, generally speaking. Blind Faith, Unity, whatever, you're going to wear that all the time. It's fantastic. Razzelik's Defilement is better in raids than Dark Glare Boon, but, you know, not very useful anywhere other than raids, and really mostly just for single target. Finally, Fiery Soul, pretty much only useful for maximizing defensiveness in raids. And for all of these, haste versatility. That's the two missives you want, haste and versatility, never anything else. Now let's move on to talents. Your talent choices are largely dictated by your legendary choices, and your legendary choices are dictated by the kind of content you're doing. So if you're doing Mythic Plus, you should be running Dark Glare Boon and the Spirit Bomb build. That's not really negotiable. This is far and away the best setup for Mythic Plus or anything AoE oriented. In raids, especially on single target or maybe two target fights, Spirit Bomb is pretty bad. And you really shouldn't be running it or Dark Glare Boon. You can get away with it, but it won't work as well as the non-Spirit Bomb, non-Dark Glare Boon setup. For raids, I run a very similar talent setup to the Mythic Plus tree. The only real swap is to drop Spirit Bomb for Infernal Armor. Then you can use either Razzelik as the generic option, or if you desperately need extra defense, Fiery Soul is good just for that defensive cooldown uptime. For most of these talent tiers, there really is only one good option. I'll go tier by tier just to be thorough, but I'm going to be quick because there's not a lot to go over. In the first tier, Agonizing Flames is far and away the best choice. Conduits and tier set bonuses have made it the best offensive and defensive option, and the mobility you gain from it is better than the mobility you get from Abyssal Strike. Fellblade is worthless. In the second tier, Feast of Souls adds very tiny amount of defensive value, Burning Alive adds limited defensive value in AoE only, and Fallout adds a ton of souls, especially in AoE. It's amazing. The other two are weak. Spirit Bomb, in the third tier, is a rotation-defining ability in AoE and probably the most iconic skill that Vengeance Demon Hunter has, bar none. I guess you could argue the Leap or Metamorphosis, but for me, it's Spirit Bomb. That being said, it's pretty weak in single target. Infernal Armor and Charred Flesh are both decent defensive options, but Infernal Armor is more consistent. I think you can make a case for using Charred Flesh if you're running Fiery Soul, but I would probably still run Infernal Armor anyways, just thanks to the amazing uptime you get on Immolation Aura. You basically have 100% uptime even in single target if you're running the full 4-piece tier set, and a free 20% armor is a good, steady, extra defensive layer that helps Demon Hunter be more tanky by quite a bit. In the fourth tier, Fracture is, again, the only real option. It makes your main resource generator a much more powerful option. It's stronger offensively and defensively than the talents next to it. I was worried that Feed the Demon might become popular in Mythic Plus pushing due to the amount of souls you can generate through Immolation Aura alone with the tier set bonus, but that has not been the case at all through Season 3. and I'm glad. Soul Rending? Worthless. Quicken Sigils has great synergy with Elysian Decree and Blind Faith and Mechanicos and just the whole Kyrian Demon Hunter thing. It's really, 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 really good. It's basically a must-have at all times. Concentrated Sigils is just overwhelmingly worse now because it doesn't synergize with Elysian Decree at all. Sigil of Chains provides pretty decent utility, but the radius on it is a little bit too small and the cost of giving up Quicken Sigils is way too high. Again, in the next tier, Demonic is the only option that is even remotely good at all. Void Reaver is way too undertuned, Soul Barrier is way too undertuned, and I think still on the GCD. Doesn't even matter if it's not, this is just yet another badly constructed talent tier. And finally, here's another badly constructed talent tier. Last Resort is amazing, one of the best cheat death effects in the game, probably the best. Ruinous Bulwark is garbage. Bulk Extraction is garbage. I have nothing good to say about either of them. They were bad from the moment they were first implemented way back in the alpha. Players gave tons of feedback, Blizzard didn't use any of it, and kept a bunch of absolutely awful talents in the tree for some reason. I guess you could say they moved on to the Dragonflight talent system already, and that's why they treated Demon Hunter talents like abandonware for yet another expansion. I realize this comes across very harsh, but there's two silver linings. One, you have great options in each tier. One great option, but one is so much better than zero. And two, this is the third expansion in a row that Demon Hunters have been in the game, and the third expansion in a row where Demon Hunter talents have been completely garbage with almost no kind of smart decision making or situational options available in the majority of tiers. There are a ton of great bonuses available to Demon Hunters, so I still have high hopes for their talent tree in Dragonflight. I really do. I think the class is going to be every bit as amazing in the next expansion as it is in this one, probably more so because there will be good options to choose from. Even though there aren't now, there's good option. That's all you need, but it feels limiting. Anyways, let's move on. Vengeance Demon Hunter has two rotations. The Spirit Bomb rotation, aka the Mythic Plus rotation, and the whatever you want to call it, raid rotation, non-Spirit Bomb rotation, Soul Cleave rotation, I guess. Ugh. In both rotations, you want to use Fiery Brand to mitigate big bursts of damage. And if damage is pretty much going to just be consistent, as it is in Mythic Plus dungeons, you want to use that as much as you can and plan other mitigation tools around its uptime. You also want to use Elysian Decree as much as you can unless you're saving it for a big AoE phase. Like, I would probably hold Elysian Decree on Lords of Dread if it comes up a little before the increased damage taken phase when they do their swirl of bugs. Or if I'm almost at the end of a Mythic Plus pull, instead of using it to like finish off everything, I would hold on to it to use at the start of the next pull if it's going to be a normal trash pull, not like a single target thing, just to have that huge extra pop of threat. Same goes with Fell Devastation. Unless you're using it to mitigate a specific burst damage event like a Jailer combo, or a Sylvanas combo, or a Denathrius combo, or a Guardian of the First One's combo, or you get the point, you should be using Fell Devastation as often as you can, too. Generally speaking, in Mythic Plus, I like to, if I have it available, start by leaping in and hitting Elysian Decree, and if I don't have it available, leaping in and hitting Immolation Aura. Either way, I'm going to hit Immolation Aura as quickly as I can too, start Spirit Bombing, and then as soon as I've Spirit Bombed and eaten up all the initial burst of souls, I'm going to hit him with a Fell Devastation. One important little note about how to use Immolation Aura is that the priority changes a bit between AoE and single target. Because the Conduit increases its damage for each second it's active, it's actually a single target DPS loss to refresh Immolation Aura before it expires, because refreshing it resets that damage buff back to the base. In AoE, it's still a DPS increase because it generates souls that you can use to blast everything with Spirit Bomb. And in both cases, it's a defensive increase because that soul generation is good for staying alive, so I wouldn't ever really worry about it too much. You can always just hit Immolation Aura every time it's up and be totally fine. But if you really want to maximize your single target TPS, letting Immolation Aura run all the way down until it's just about to expire is one tiny little optimization you can make. If you're using Razalix Defilement, you should never Sigil of Flame. I write my macros so that Sigil of Flame isn't even on my bars unless I'm talented into Spirit Bomb because of this. Sigil of Flame's damage is very, very low, and wasting Elysian Decree cooldown reduction on it is bad. I really only ever use Sigil of Flame when I'm pulling in Mythic Plus, because you can precast it and basically get an AoE hit in for free before anybody else has touched it. Maybe I'll use it to score some AoE threat from range if I'm trying to pull an extra pack while I'm already in combat, but that is about it. It's possible to have every other important skill on cooldown and use it as a filler. But then again, if you're not playing a Razalix build, that situation is pretty uncommon in Mythic Plus. You usually have enough souls to always be able to Spirit Bomb. Or if you've just Spirit Bombed and eaten up all of your souls, you have some other important soul generating ability to use instead. So the main difference between Spirit Bomb and the Soul Cleave playstyle is how you handle soul fragments. For Spirit Bomb, you want to make sure you have at least 4 soul fragments for each Spirit Bomb cast. There are times, because soul fragments are physical objects that exist in the world instead of just a combo point system, there are times where you're going to accidentally bump into a fragment and eat a couple of them right as you were about to Spirit Bomb, and now instead of having 5, you have 2. In that case, just let it rip. It happens to the best of us. The bigger thing I would warn you to be aware of is once you've hit at least 4 or, even potentially 5 souls, not to keep generating more. Because the 2-piece randomly generates souls, this can happen, it's uncontrollable, but the most important thing is just to focus on, once you have 4 souls, hit that Spirit Bomb, let it go. Ideally, you never go over the cap of 5, but it just happens sometimes, and it's not the end of the world. Most importantly, when you're using Spirit Bomb, you want to eat all of your souls with Spirit Bomb and never with Soul Cleave. You should still keep Soul Cleave on a key binding when you're playing Spirit Bomb. There are times where you've just Spirit Bombed all your souls away, you don't really have great soul fragment generating abilities available at that second, but you do have some pain to burn through. Why not hit Soul Cleave once or twice, and then you can start generating more souls to Spirit Bomb away. But you won't be pressing Soul Cleave often at all. Beyond that, the play styles are fairly similar. In both cases, you want to use Immolation Aura and Fracture very aggressively. Be proactive with Elysian Decree, Fiery Brand, and Fell Devastation, and that's it. Just make sure you keep Spirit Bombing every time you get to 4 or 5 souls. Let me quickly mention Demon Spike since I haven't really talked about it at all yet. It's the simplest active mitigation skill in the game. You use it to mitigate physical damage. That's basically it. Demon Hunter already has the strongest magic mitigation in the game just passively, so that's not really a concern most of the time either. The basic rule is just to use Demon Spikes as often as you can while tanking. There's literally nothing to manage. There's no resource or anything. There's just the cooldown. In normal circumstances, you don't want to overlap it with Fell Devastation's free meta proc or with Fiery Brand, but otherwise you just use it. Usually when I leap into a pull and, I'm leaping in and hitting Immolation Aura, I'm also hitting Demon Spikes as I'm about to land, so that I'm not taking a bunch of massive auto attack hits. Most of the time I try to roll from one damage reduction skill to another. So, again, using that leaping in and immolating example, I'm leaping in, Immolation Aura and Demon Spikes together. Oh, Demon Spikes is about to fall off, time to hit him with a Fell Devastation, get some meta. Oh, meta's about to fall off, I'll use Demon Spikes around the time it does. Oh, Demon Spikes is about to fall off, I guess I'll Fiery Brand at the end. Fiery Brand's about to end, Demon Spikes 2, Return of the Spikes, and so on. Demon Spikes really isn't a strong defensive effect on its own. There are plenty of spots where you want to double it up with something else, particularly when we're talking about raid boss combos. Demon Spikes isn't going to keep you alive on a Guardian the first one's massive combo hit. You need Fiery Brand or Meta or both layered in with it to stay alive. Honestly, this is one of the biggest complaints that Demon Hunter mains make about the spec, and it's where I say, once again, that I think they're thinking about the spec in the wrong way. You don't just use Ignore Pain to soak boss hits. You don't use Death Strike and Death Strike alone to live through Jailer combos. Having to layer meta and Demon Spikes to soak big physical hits makes sense to me. Demon Spikes is like Shield Block if Shield Block sucked. It's okay, you have like 3 other things on pretty short cooldowns that you can roll in to cover the actual pain points, and you have a huge health pool and a decent degree of self-healing as well. The main component of staying alive while tanking on a Demon Hunter is just being really aggressive with your skills. Pulling correctly is something I've been trying to emphasize on each tank with this series of guides, because I think it's something that a lot of players find to be a real pain point in playing, well, tanks. Demon Hunter is definitely the easiest of the 6 tanks when it comes to pulling. I've gone back and forth on Demon Hunter and Warrior as to which is the easiest, but I think I'm back in the case of it being Demon Hunter. Ignore that last guide where I said that it was Warrior. You can always open with Elysian Decree from range, but I don't like to do that because I'm worried that enemies will run out of the explosion, and I definitely do not want that. Instead, I like to open up with a pre-pull Sigil of Flame, and then leap in and hit Immolation Aura as the sigil is exploding. Once I have all the mobs gathered up, I hit them with Elysian Decree, 2 Spirit Bombs, and that is it for threat. No one on Earth is going to pull threat off of you after all of that. If you're pulling a boss, that's usually pretty easy. I always start with Taunt and my hardest hitting abilities, so again, Leap, Immolation Aura, Elysian Decree are all going to be high priority skills to use as quickly as I can. In the case of a single target boss situation, I will try to leap in, Immolation Aura, hit him with a couple of fractures, and then Elysian Decree if I'm in a Mythic Plus so that I can quickly double Spirit Bomb, but if it's in Raid, I'm just going to Immolation Aura, Elysian Decree, and just start rolling out the Soul Cleaves and get Fell Devastation going as well. In either case, I'm Fell Devastating as quickly as I can. Vengeance Demon Hunter's single target damage is pretty bad, so holding threat and pure single target against another tank early in a pull can be a bit of a challenge. Be ready to taunt back as needed. I wish there was some positive I could say here, but no, your single target damage will suck. Now let's talk about stats and gear. Versatility is the best stat. It makes you tankier. It increases your healing and damage, and that's great. You want as much as you can get. Haste is also a great stat. It increases your demonic spikes uptime and your resource generation, and that's also pretty great. Mastery is pretty weak, and crit is okay but inconsistent, and there's no kind of interesting synergy for Demon Hunters with crit. It just increases your crit chance and your parry chance, and that's the end. I'll also add that agility is really nice too. The problem with mastery and agility is they really only apply to your defenses when Demon Spikes is up, and that's just not enough of the time for either of them to really be good defensive stats. The most important thing to go after when you're gearing up are your tier set bonuses and your legendaries, of course, and then item level, and then like sockets and versatility. Now as for enchants, I'll just go slot by slot. Celestial Guidance is a very good enchant. It provides a solid mix of offensive and defensive value, and because it's a personal buff, it's pretty consistent. You should have that on one of your weapons. I prefer Sinful Revelation on the other weapon for maximizing damage output in single target. I realize Demon Hunter damage output in single target isn't great, but that's all the more reason to just make it matter as much as you can. I've mostly stopped using Lightless Force on any of my characters. It is a decent AoE damage proc, but getting more damage onto priority targets is more valuable than just padding out the AoE damage meters. Also, because Lightless Force is like an actual AoE proc that moves through the world, it can miss enemies, so it doesn't perform nearly as well as it sims in the real world. I wear versatility on rings and in gem slots. I use 30 stats on chest, and you can go with avoidance or leech on cloak. Leech is definitely better for Mythic Plus, where your damage output is going to be much higher. In my experience, avoidance tends to be better in raids, where your damage output is pretty low, and that extra mitigation is a lot more valuable there, but leech can still be fine in raids too. Now let's go over some of the gear that's going to be available here in Season 4 that's a little bit special, and talk about how to spend your dinars. Dinars are a currency you acquire by killing bosses in raids, and you can use them to purchase items from 3 vendors standing beside the Great Vault. They sell you up to 3 items in total, and then they disappear. They sell weapons and trinkets from the 3 raids, and that's it. So basically you will just want to buy the best weapon and trinkets you can and say goodbye. The items you buy are normal fated item level, which is 278 for regular bosses drops throughout raids, and then 285 for the, Sire Denathrius, Jailer, Sylvanas, Kel'Thuzad, that kind of guys. There is another currency that you acquire by killing heroic and mythic bosses that you can combine to make upgrade tokens that you can then convert those normal items into heroic items and then subsequently into mythic items as well. And you get those, like I said, by killing heroic bosses or killing mythic bosses in raids. Now let's run through the important pieces of gear you want to pick up from this system. I will start by saying there are 4 trinkets of real note in Season 4, 2 are from Mythic Plus, so I'll get to them afterward, and 2 of them are from Sanctum of Domination, so you can just buy them straight up. The first Sanctum of Domination trinket is Shard of Anhilda's Aegis. It is the best defensive trinket in the game. It massively reduces your damage taken while it's active, and the cooldown is a mere 90 seconds. So this is a really amazing trinket, and I love it on every single tank. I'm gonna be, I've been effusive in my praise for it in the first 3 tank videos I've done. Now this is the 4th. I intend to do the same for the next 2. The only downside to buying this trinket with dinars is that it comes from the 9, which is a pretty easy boss early on in Sanctum of Domination. Buying this trinket is a bit like finding a genie in a magic lamp and then spending your first wish on like a Mountain Dew Baja Blast. It's great, you're definitely gonna enjoy it, but you could have gone for something a little harder to get. I might still buy this trinket after all. It is the best in slot option for basically all tanks, at least from a defensive perspective. I will try to do Sanctum a couple of times first, just to see if I can get it to drop easily the regular way, and then I can spend my coins on other harder to get items instead. Also, even for mythic raid tanks like myself, I would recommend running LFR Sanctum of Domination to get an LFR Shard of Anhilda's Aegis when it is the Fated Week. A 265 item level Shard of Anhilda's Aegis is insane. Other than, higher item level shards of Anhilda's Aegis, it's basically unparalleled in terms of the defensive value it offers. There's almost no other trinkets as good as this, even at 265 item level. Next, and definitely less good, is Reactive Defense Matrix from Guardian of the First Ones. This is a really good trinket. The random shielding is nice, particularly against bosses like Rygalon, who do tons of damage all the time, and the guaranteed shield when you fall below 20% health will definitely save your life. The combination of Reactive Defense Matrix and Shard of Anhilda's Aegis was the most popular trinket pairing for doing Rygalon progression very early on in Sepulchre of the First Ones. And I actually never got one of these Reactive Defense Matrixes on my monk, so yeah, I'm pretty thirsty to have this trinket, I have to say, especially at a really high juicy item level. I think this thing is going to be pretty amazing to have. I mean, hey, it's totally passive reactive damage and shielding, so, it's pretty amazing for anything that hits super hard or that you're tanking all the time, like Sludge Fist, and obviously Mythic Plus. Maybe it's not the best for taunt swap fights that are a little more boring. Still though, very good. And finally, just to be thorough when it comes to talking about Dinars, I think dual-wielding a one-handed weapon from the Jailer and a Cruciform Vein Ripper, the one-handed weapon from Painsmith and Sanctum of Domination, is the ideal weapon setup. I found the Cruciform Vein Ripper to be idiotically rare in Sanctum. I got mine on my monk on the last raid week of the entire patch, and I killed Mythic Painsmith during the first week of Mythic Progression, and all but 2 weeks of the entire 6-month tier, and I saw one. I never got it on any other characters. I think it was even from the weekly cache. I don't think it was a drop. Months and months and months of clearing that raid multiple times a week, and I never saw it on my Demon Hunter. So this weapon is definitely rare, and it should be a high priority purchase for sure. Now, in terms of dual wielding it versus running one and a Jailer weapon, I've simmed it out a bit. You can do the same for yourself. Dual wielding Cruciform Vein Rippers is slightly better for single target, but the difference isn't that huge. It is without a doubt worse for AoE to have a lower item level weapon than the one you can get from Jailer, and also a weapon with no secondary stats. So I think hedging your bets on having Jailer weapon in the main hand, Cruciform Vein Ripper in the offhand is the setup that I'm going to go with for all content. I'm willing to take that small offensive damage hit in pure single target of not running two Cruciform Vein Rippers to be just a little bit more consistently good everywhere else. Now let's go back to that list of trinkets and focus on Codex of the First Technique from Tazavesh. This is a Mythic Plus drop, so it obviously isn't something you can buy with dinars, but I want to mention it here in the context of trinkets because it is sort of a competitor to the two I talked about beforehand. This trinket looks like it functions similarly to Shard of Enhilda's Aegis, but it actually doesn't. It is a 10% damage reflection proc effect that occurs after all other mitigation and absorption effects are calculated. It also grants stamina instead of agility. Because agility is such a mediocre stat for demon hunters, this is an okay trinket, but it's really only good if you're taking enormous amounts of damage, such as tanking dungeons over 25s or doing Mythic Rygalon. For anything less than that, I'm serious, anything less than that, it's actually really pretty bad. The only other trinkets that I think are super good and worth mentioning here are Thunder Tower's Targeting Reticule from Grimrail Depot, which is a passive agility and versatility stat stick, and Stone Legion Heraldry from the Stone Legion Generals, which is a passive agility and versatility stat stick. Finally, let's talk about cheat death trinkets. You can use one, and I would recommend the Weep of Warped Fates from Fate Scribe and Sanctum if you do, but I generally think they're a weaker choice than running more proactive defensive trinkets, even on normal tanks, and Demon Hunter already has a built-in cheat death as a talent. A cheat death trinket is basically like a defensive cooldown every 8 minutes, whereas trinkets like Shard of Enhilda's Aegis are a cooldown every 90 seconds, and Reactive Defense Matrix is just defensive value all the time. And both of those provide a lot more protection overall than a cheat death trinket. I would probably never run a cheat death trinket on a Demon Hunter. I think it's a complete mistake. Even a passive damage reduction trinket like Reactive Defense Matrix or even Codex of the First Technique is just going to do a lot more over the course of time. Alright, now that I've covered trinkets and given sort of a deep dive on those, let's finish up by going over the rest of the important drops from Dungeons in Season 4. I already mentioned Codex of the First Technique from Tazavesh, which I don't really love, but I didn't mention Solia's Secret Technique, which is a pretty good agility versatility trinket option. For it to be a versatility option, it requires somebody else in your party to be running versatility as their primary stat, which isn't super common, which is why I kind of knocked this down compared to Thunder Tower's Targeting Reticle or whatever it is. I would say this is kind of like a problematic version of Elegy of the Eternals from Sepulchre of the First Ones, and not really the highest priority trinket to farm, but it's not bad either. Ticking Sack of Terror is a pretty good offensive trinket from Tazavesh. It's decent, but the mastery isn't great. Cabocon of the Infinite Flight and Signet of Collapsing Stars are a haste verse neck and ring combo that are available from Tazavesh Gambit. They're really well itemized for Demon Hunter. They're really itemized pretty well for most tanks, so there's a lot of reason to want to run Gambit. But that being said, you also have Mechagon gear available. And I think the main pieces of valuable gear from Mechagon are obviously gonna be the rings. Ideally, you want a logic loop of recursion and an overclocking bitband. When combined, those Mechagon rings really add a massive amount of value. The itemization is okay on each ring, neither of them has versatility, which is a strike against them, but once you've completed the set, the extra stat budget that they provide will make up for that missing versatility on the rings. The only other really notable pieces from Mechagon are Salvaged Incendiary Tool and Remote Guidance Device, which is a pretty basic damage trinket. You press the button, it does some damage. The Salvage Incendiary Tool is an axe that procs a pretty powerful dot on enemies. It doesn't have secondary stats, but during BFA it was strong enough to compensate for that pretty well, so it makes a good direct damage weapon option, at least, as something to throw in your offhand. Karazhan has several pretty good pieces of gear, so let's run through them too. The Choker of Barbed Rains from Atumen can provide a decent damage proc, although the stats aren't really very good. Amulet of the Last Guardian is a haste verse neck, so it's a really good option of a neck that's available from Mythic Plus, as well as that Tazavesh one. Eye of Command is a pretty simple trinket. It grants a lot of crit, so it's a decent DPS option, but not great. It has a bit of ramp up when you swap targets, but it should only take about 10 to 12 seconds or so to ramp up to 10 stacks. You dual wield as a Demon Hunter, and you have a lot of haste, so you're going to get 10 auto attacks in fairly quickly. A 10-second ramp up on a bunch of crit isn't too bad, but it does reset if you swap to, kill an explosive, and that's kind of annoying. Most of the other trinkets in Karazhan, I'm just looking at my list here, are terrible, and I shouldn't have even written them down. That's how bad they are. I feel dumb for having done it. The Ring of Collapsing Futures is pretty good, though. It adds a free damage on use effect. It's good, but the itemization isn't great. I would say that if you get one, you can use it until you put together a Mechagon ring set, but I wouldn't go out of my way to farm it. I certainly wouldn't, hang on to it if I could trade it and somebody else wanted it, and I had versatility ring options. I'd just stick with those. On the subject of versatility ring options, the Seal of Darkshire Nobility has decent stats and an okay defensive proc. This basically makes the start of any mythic pull, 10% less dangerous, and that's actually really good. The start of pulls is usually the most dangerous part of a fight, especially on a Demon Hunter when you're building up pain so that you can cast Fell Devastation and get Metamorphosis going. Getting a free minor defensive cooldown out of a ring slot that's also got a bunch of versatility on it is great. And finally, let me cover the drops from the 2 Warlords of Draenor dungeons, Iron Docks and Grimrail Depot. There's a lot of jewelry and random armor available in Iron Docks and Grimrail. For the most part, it's pretty much just generic gear. The rings and necklaces have agility on them, which might seem good, but because of the agility, they're tuned to have lower secondary stat values. And because agility isn't very good for Demon Hunter, this is a pretty awful trade. Basically, they just aren't tuned right. So these things, the rings and necks from Warlords of Draenor are weaker than equal item level rings and necks from Legion, BFA, and Shadowlands. If you get a perfect wad ring or neck, like one with haste and versatility on it, maybe it's worth wearing unless you have an equally or pretty close to as perfect non-wad jewelry piece competing with it. But basically, I wouldn't go out of my way to farm any of the wad jewelry. I probably wouldn't wear it unless it's a substantial item level increase and it's very well itemized. There are a couple of weapons available from Iron Docks, but they aren't super well itemized either. So again, I don't think it's worth targeting them. I would wear them if they're item level upgrades, but that's about it. There is one piece that I recommend target farming out of Grimrail Depot for Vengeance Demon Hunter, and that is the trinket Thunder Tower's Targeting Reticle. I already mentioned it, but this trinket rules. It's great, it's agility and versatility, what's not to love? And that's it on trinkets and important Season 4 gear. If I didn't include a piece of gear, that's probably because it's not very good. It can still work while you try to get your hands on some of the items that are on this list, but you wouldn't want to think about it as a permanent solution. As we approach the end of Shadowlands, Vengeance Demon Hunter has been pretty good. It started out as the best tank by far, and even after getting nerfed really hard coming out of Castle Nathria, it's still a solid upper middle of the pack tank. Even if the damage output is really poorly undertuned in raids, the way the class plays and performs in Mythic Plus is extremely strong and fun. I can't emphasize enough how much fun it is to play a Demon Hunter. Like I said in the intro, I think this is my favorite tank in the game. It just has almost everything I could possibly want out of a tank other than like stagger and death grip. It's hard to kill, it does tons of AoE damage and healing, and it's very easy to play. It's great. Well, I think that about covers it. If you have any questions about Vengeance Demon Hunter in Shadowlands Season 4, ask away. Stay tuned for more Shadowlands and Dragonflight content, and thanks for watching. Bye.